complicated, and so if you do want to swap them out, there aren't any standards to really help with that above and beyond XTCE, I would say, at the moment. So we had a couple questions from the audience, one for Afshin again. And the audience wants to know, Afshin, for those cases when XTCE did not capture GOZAR data, did your team submit issues to the OMG?
We perhaps relied on Brad to do so. We had an issue, I think, with one of the attributes, and I believe that was part of XTCE 1.1.1.12. So the min violations attribute, I believe. Right. But yeah, in some cases we relied on our vendor to do so directly with the OMG instead of going, and we didn't go directly to the OMG, we relied on the vendor to go to the OMG.
Got you. And is that because you're just such good friends with Brad that, and you paid him a lot of money, so you figured he should do that for you, or was it just too difficult? The OMG website's too complicated.
It's more an awareness thing. I think a lot of people that are end users, they don't really realize essentially they're open specs, and anybody can write an issue. Yeah. Just go to the web page and write an issue.
Yeah, and we do encourage. I encourage all my customers when they have bugs or they find issues to absolutely go to the OMG website and put them in there. It's the one way that we can't get it. We can't avoid tracking them. Otherwise, we can conveniently avoid them. But if you submit them directly to the OMG website, then we have to pay attention, and that's a good thing.
Sure, we can take that in precedent, future suggestions.
So, another question from the audience is, what other programs has XTCE been used on?
So JWST was using XTCE. I think in a lot of cases though, XTCE is the exchange format, and then they have another wrapper function for the ground system to ingest it directly. So I think JWST had that situation as well. But I know for a fact that JWST was using XTCE.
Okay. Any others, guys?
Yeah, I don't want to be naming customers, without their permission. So, but I can say in a high level, there's several satellites that are using XTCE. We also have one customer who's planning right now, or asking about and inquiring and working on possibly going to XTCE for the next deep space mission. So that will be interesting. And then we have one other customer that they use both XTCE and the airborne, which is called TMATS, because they need both to define their telemetry. So yeah, there's quite a wide variety.
Yeah. So when do you have customers that don't come with XTCE databases, and do you encourage them to convert them?
The vast majority do not. They develop them in-house, but standardization would make their life so much easier.
Okay.
So within Boeing, our legacy satellite, the Boeing 702, which is the big popular school bus size satellite, does not yet have an official XTCE implementation, only a prototype. But our newer satellite platforms both have XTCE implementations, and I worked on one of those two. And other customers of ours beyond Iridium also have XTCE implementations, including CST-100, which is our manned spacecraft program, and I worked on that as well. So pretty much everything that's happening that's new development is going in the direction of XTCE. And the tool has been actually used by multiple customers already, so it's fully TRL9. It's in the field being used today. And the Europeans, I think ESA is one of the contributors to the open source project, is using it. I can't remember the name of the bird now, but it's one of their new weather observation satellites that they're putting together. It is using it actively.
And if I could add one last little thing, is another thing we're seeing very recently is that we're getting customers that want us to start exporting XTCE. Because normally right now we just take it in to set up our software, but they want it because they're using another vendor's scheduling tool or another vendor's simulator or whatever, and it makes their life a lot easier if they have just one database that they can hand around. So.
I see you nodding your head a lot, Justin.
Yeah, that's become what we've also been dealing with is actually having it be a primary format instead of an exchange format.
Yeah. Is there value? XTCE has been around for a long time. I think actually the Space Domain Task Force was pretty much formed around XTCE. It's in my mind, it's a great example of showing how long it takes, especially in our industry, for a standard to gain traction. And it sounds like what you guys are saying is that it is slowly but surely, becoming something that's a requirement on the program side, which is pretty exciting. So another question from the audience here. How much attention should be placed on external factors such as performance, security, and backwards compatibility when defining space standards? You need to hear it again?
Yes.
Yes. How much attention should be placed on external factors such as performance, security, and backwards compatibility when defining space standards?
I'll take it, I guess, first.
Okay.
So I'm used to dealing with an XTCE document that's several hundred megabytes containing upwards of 250,000 parameters, tens of thousands of telemetry packets. I had to build performance and scalability in right from the very get-go. There was just no way that an ASCII XML document was going to perform in that user interface at mouse click speed without a lot of attention paid to how you were going to read it in, what the model was going to look like, and deal with that performance. My end users were never going to tolerate anything that was, press a button and wait 5 seconds, right? It had to be under 1 second. Everything had to be snappy. That's something of a challenge. Obviously, for the standpoint of XTCE, security doesn't as much come into play. But the performance and scalability is definitely a challenge, which is partly why I think there was something of a delay of industry acceptance, is because of that lack of community support, that everybody on their own individual level had to take that initial hump, right, and take the pain of the initial implementation, rather than leveraging the fact that somebody's already got it.
I'll go next. I'll say that all of those external factors are important. I think it definitely varies based on the given customer, which one is most important. Though because I would definitely say in like the small sat market, I don't think backwards compatibility is actually as relevant. But in the government spaces, security is definitely the #1 thing. And so I would say that, and I would definitely say that scalability can also be important. But it really does depend on the market and the specific customer set, and I think in terms of which one I'll say is the most important. Though I think more and more, I think the way that we're developing software needs to actually embrace all of them, and it's not just something you think about after you've delivered or when you're ready to test. You're going to say, is it scale enough? Is it secure enough? You need to do, those things are baked into your systems engineering, I'll say, from the start.
So I agree with Justin. The first two are definitely more important for satellite missions at NOAA and NASA. Backwards compatibility in no way, shape, or form are the vast majority of functions for GOES NOP. The databases are not compliant. It's not like we can have the same ground system software running to support NOP versus the GOES R series. Within the series, they are somewhat backwards, or they're compatible just because it's basically relatively the same flight software just running on board the spacecraft. And that's being done, the packets are being sent down to the ground system. But yeah, the first two considerations for security and for performance, those are the top two criteria, and they need to be considered for any standard, not just XTCE, because of course, XTCE is just a flat XML file. How much security can you apply to it rather than, besides just not exchanging it with dangerous people? So, but the first two considerations I think are very important.
Sure. Well, and let me ask you specifically about backwards compatibility, though, on your particular program. I mean, you invest. I assume you invest resources, either human or not, in dealing with XTCE. And if I told you that version 3.0, we it's definitely not going to look like version 1.2, or what's your take on that?
We would write a Python script to convert from one version to another.
Okay.
We did quickly.
Yeah. Smart answer.
Yeah, so backwards compatibility, those challenges can always be mitigated, because in most cases it can be mitigated with software, with some kind of conversion tool. So those I'm not as afraid of. Security violations, the government will take this very, very seriously. Performance, if it can't perform, then your mission success has been decimated. So.
Yeah.
I didn't mention it, Louise, but the backwards compatibility question is definitely is a hot topic right now because of the customizations that we've been incorporating. But the XTC toolkit, download that, it automatically up-converts documents. So.
Yeah. Oh, I'll mention, I'll put a blurb in for security as it applies to the way that the Space Domain Task Force approaches it, and I would definitely say that it's something that we've lacked on specification-wise over the past, probably from its inception. We tend to look at specifications as a way for making our customers productive. So we try to pull out things that maybe are difficult or we think are customer specific. I'd say that what we're finding now is security in our industry is becoming a primary concern, and you will see that kind of stuff more baked into the specs. Mostly so that customers can't turn the features off or they can't easily get around them and then come back and say that there was no mechanism for protecting those particular standards.
I would just like to add, in the flight test community, we have an equal set of standards, and security and performance are not really baked in.
Yeah.
And these are primarily government classified programs. So that's usually left up to the implementation as opposed to trying to put it in standards. So you go so far as to say, is this encrypted, is this not, is this classified, is this not, but you don't take it much further.
Yeah.
Should mention that there's a government standard for adding classification information into XML data. And what?
ISM.xml.
Yeah. And we kind of throw that in. That's one of the reasons we're kind of a parser. It's a little bit different than the parsers, but yeah. There's no conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing, if it's just XML and you're doing file exchange with people, you've got XML signature and XML encryption that can make it so that they know it's coming from where they think it's coming from, or that there's, type 3, probably certificate-based encryption wrapped around the file.
Yeah, so we're talking about the delivery.
The
where
delivery,
trust.
yeah. As
where
opposed to
trust-
the markup inside the payload.
Yep. Okay. Next question from us. I will ask the group, does the satellite lifetime affect the value of applying standards to a satellite mission? And if so, what length of mission is too short to gain significant benefits?
None. The smaller satellites will benefit more from standardization because you don't have to go through the process of developing everything from scratch. So especially if with Dave's tool, for example, you can get into XTCE at the ground floor now very simply. And so if you're developing a small satellite, you have a very limited budget. The standards are going to be your best friend. You don't have to, as Dan said, reinvent the wheel.
Okay. Another question from the audience here. Is there a business case for vendors to invest in standards before customer says they need it?
As a programmer and not a BD guy or anything, yes, there is, because then you get into the ground floor of that, and yeah, we fall into a rut where we wait until the customer pays us or tells us we want this for this program, and then we get into it, and we find ourselves sometimes falling behind because of that, or we need to basically, we need to spend more IRAD in our organization on this. And so, yes, there is definitely a good case for that.
I can also add to that. In some cases, the vendors will just be basically interviewing with their customers, right? So then they can present themselves and say, okay, we have already researched the standards and our products are compatible with this standard, which is the industry standard, or which is very prevalent in the industry, and we support this. So then that becomes another selling point for the vendor to their customer. So it definitely makes sense for vendors to invest in standards before the customer thinks of it. In some cases, the customer might be new to this endeavor or to this technology, and they might not know of all the standards that are available. They just have a basic requirement for mission functionality. They might not necessarily be aware of all the implementation details that go into fulfilling that, the mission scope.
Is it enough to just give you a specification, though, as an end user? Let's say that we come up with a standard that we think is super useful, and develop it within OMG, and it comes out, and what we end up giving you is just a document like XTCE that says, now go do this. Is that super useful?
That's a good starting point. And so before you have you're going to need meetings. Before you have your first meeting, hopefully everybody would have read that documentation that was provided, and that was the case for our relationship with Harris/Parenting. But yeah, you need documentation, and then you also need meetings. And that's what I was trying to convey with my presentation, with all the meetings that we had. We met multiple times over 6 years, and they were very detailed and long meetings. And we invested a lot of time and energy just on talking. We actually met face to face about this too. We had detailed telecoms about this. So the documentation is not enough.
Yeah.
You still need the human touch or just communication in spoken language.
Sure. Okay. Before I ask the last couple of questions, anybody in the audience have anything that they'd like to ask very quickly?
I have a comment to the last comment. Also, I'm Sil Jenkins. I'm actually, I guess, involved in another standards body called Future Working Utility. And one of the things is that one of the things our sponsors are looking for is that we need more than paper now. That we need proof, we need reference implementations, we need examples, and that the paper is not enough anymore. So
Yeah.
this is a comment.
Yeah, and it's actually why I posed the question to you, Afshin, because our industry, that's especially difficult. As Dan Smith knows, going through the C2MS process, we have implementations of a lot of these specifications internally. It's very difficult for us to provide them as either reference implementations or open source for customers to take advantage of, just because of the legalese and the programs that we deal with.
Defense contractors don't do a lot of open source.
They don't like sharing, that's for sure, as well.
No, and I agree with the comment.
Yeah.
Definitely.
One comment, that this isn't my forum, but I have briefing slides that show from Fujitsu and ISO where 15 to 21% return on your investment by using standards. Another study showed a 70 to 80% reuse rate for development programs. So if you have a program, you have a standard or a model that you're using, would you not be willing to start from ground zero or 80% of the way home? When you do the 80% home, you're reducing your risk.
Sure.
And I would just comment, I would say on XTCE, the Green Book. Yeah, which I think you helped fund or pay for. So that is the Green Book, which is kind of the explanatory side comment, was a very good orthogonal look at it, which is, which back says, oh, we have this element, this is what you do with it. And so that was very handy for our development.
But it is still paper.
Well, we've also downloaded Dave's stuff.
Reference implementation.
I don't remember who, but there is another standards developing organization where part of committing to a project is having commitment from some number of people for developing a reference implementation in a particular amount of time.
So OMG's requirement is that as part of the submission for the specification, the submitter has to commit to producing an implementation, not necessarily an open source, but an implementation. CCSBS, as an interagency, they require 2 agencies to implement the specification. That's right.
And ours is proprietary, that's right.
All right. So we have a little bit less than 5 minutes. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll take a break. Right outside, we have a couple booths. I just want to remind everybody, there's NASA's got a C2MS demonstration. Periton has some pretty cool CubeSats that Brad showed off here, and an OS Comet in the cloud demonstration out there. The SysML CubeSat reference model, the big poster is out there. Dave Kaslow will be, I assume, manning that and answering any questions. That's a pretty impressive implementation using SysML. Yeah, and you're going to be out there? No, Justin. Sorry, Justin and Kratos RT Logic has got a demonstration of some of their products as well. So one last question, then we'll break. Can any of you comment on the relative benefits of broad scope versus narrow scope standards for the enterprise? For example, TCP, or Transmission Control Protocol, versus DDS, Data Distribution Service, versus C2MS, which is a Command and Control Messaging Specification. DDS and C2MS are both OMG standards. C2MS is this close.
I think it has something to do with where you're willing to draw the line in the analysis. Computing technology in general, not just what we're doing, but the operating environments are becoming exponentially more complex every year. So, I guess, the happiness of the people who design things like TCP and IP, they're so ubiquitous now that you don't even think about having it. So we kind of discount, we discount a lot of what happens underneath the covers and focus entirely on what the software is for our mission without counting these things. So clearly it's obvious that those relatively broad scope standards are incredibly powerful, and now we don't even consider other options, right? That's the only option that really exists. And now when we get into the more domain specific specifications, we end up having problems with lack of scope. One can make a defense for a broadly used standard, being as it has a massive community that supports it, works out the bugs, and gets it to be very solid. You can say things like this about Corba, right? Corba is almost becoming ubiquitous because there's many, many, many libraries in your operating system. There's many devices on board that use Corba. You don't even know it, right? It's just there. But when we deal with something like XTCE or C2MS or GEMS, unfortunately the user community is small, so it takes sort of an extra push to get those over the finish line of being able to satisfy the needs of customers. At least we could say that that's what we've learned, but it probably was obvious right from the beginning. Right?
Yes.
So, any other thoughts on the topic?
Okay. Yes.
Actually, do have a thought on that.
Yeah.
Is that the same as your use case of not reinventing the wheel when you're building a system, when you're building standards, you don't need to reinvent the wheel, and so you will want to build on those broad use case standards as much as possible, so that you might have a small implementation community, it can be probably built on something like IP.
I have an internal comment in our organization about that reinventing the wheel kind of thing, because I think with many large organizations, including the one I work for, there's a not invented here syndrome,
Yes.
right? And people kind of like to do what they're